A few months ago, I'm decluttering my desk when under a pile of papers and letters, I find a notebook filled with my to-do list. I open it to see if I can still salvage it somehow, if there's still a good number of blank pages left, when I see written over and over again, but always unchecked, the word Spanish. My first language is Indonesian, second is English, and I started learning Spanish when I met my husband, Gerardo. It's 2023 now, 10 years later, and sadly, my Spanish level is still at Hola, ¿cómo estás? It's still at Hola, ¿cómo estás? When I visit my in-laws for the holidays, who speaks mostly Spanish. It's still at Hola, ¿cómo estás? When I go on a solo backpacking trip across Mexico. It's still at Hola, ¿cómo estás? When I'm trying to have a conversation in Spanish with my 2-year-old, who, let's face it, speaks better Spanish than me. Ay, ay, ay. What went wrong? How come Spanish keeps showing up time and again in my to-do list? I'm a psychiatrist, so by default, I love to analyze. Perhaps a little too much. And as a doctor, I'm literally trained to assess every single situation as life or death. I'm also a sports psychiatrist and former student athlete. So to me, it's all about the grind, the hustle, that strive for perfection. Let me walk you through my mind. If I were to, say, learn Spanish, I want to be the best at it right away. If I'm not going to be the best, worse, if I'm just going to be mediocre, what's the point? Why bother? Suppose I can learn with Spanish subtitle on Netflix, but I can't be the best if I don't understand grammar. Maybe a physical book or Kindle, but I can't be perfect if I don't hear the accent. A Spanish class? But when's the best time to start? I'm exhausted, overwhelmed, just running this algorithm, this decision-making process, and simply scribble Spanish for another day. It's not until I've had my first child, and especially after my second, when I realized that all too often, I'm not doing things I need to do because I'm too focused on being the best. I conclude that yes, good is the enemy of great, but so can trying to be the best. In fact, trying to be the best can do the opposite, prevent progress. Perfectionism is defined as a personality trait where one strives for flawlessness. It looks like excessive planning, fixating on details, obsessing over making mistakes. While perfectionism can be useful, it's also linked to higher risks of burnout, depression, anxiety. Research shows that perfectionists are more likely to procrastinate, perhaps out of fear of not meeting their own high standards, and that 40% of procrastinators are also perfectionists. A recent study of 40,000 college students shows a 33% increase in perfectionism just between 1989 and 2016. It may even be higher now with today's competitive and comparison culture. I want to share a few examples on perfectionism at work. The first is this idea of optimal. In 2021, in the middle of the pandemic and my medical training, I had my first child, Zoe. For the first 6 months, it's just my husband and I, first-time parents, scrambling with work and the baby, no family, no other type of help. I'm constantly overwhelmed, feeling like I'm neither a perfect mom nor a perfect doctor. Feeling pulled into directions at once, I tell myself, hey, it's simply a matter of pushing myself. So work harder and harder to be the best in both worlds. After all, it's always been my strategy when I work to get the best grades, get into the best school. To me, anything but being the best falls away. As a psychiatrist, I noticed that a lot of my patients are facing the same internal struggles of feeling less than perfect. What's more, I've seen the consequences of this drive towards perfection, of setting unrealistic expectation almost every day in my office. Powerful feelings of anxiety, depression, but also inaction. The number one reason why people don't take action is they tell themselves the situation is less than optimal. If the timing's not perfect, and if you're bound to fall short of perfection anyway, why try at all? In my work with athletes and new moms, this connection between perfectionism and inaction is especially apparent, particularly for those in the midst of a transition. Too many of us are stuck in this sense of inadequacy that's preventing us from undertaking the change we need to make. This tendency to wait until the stars align is less talked about, but has just as a powerful negative impact as the more widely documented impacts of social media. Social media can make us feel like we need to have this perfect life. In fact, one of the things we say all the time, especially if we're on Instagram, is that someone is living their best life. Not a good life, not a great life, a best life. We're scrolling through a seemingly endless series of glittering vacation, gourmet meals, and in my case, meticulously post selfies of smiling parents with their apparently extraordinary children. We scroll, and as we do, our anxiety builds. We start to wonder, is there something wrong with us? Because while we may feel like doing our best, our lives are far from perfect. As you might already know, perfection doesn't exist. What does exist is our own perfectionistic tendencies, which are often the ones holding us back, whether we know it or not. And the sooner we realize this, the sooner we get on to the road of fulfillment. I want to leave you with a quick story. When Zoe turned 1, I read about how one session of exercise helps with anxiety. And that flipped the switch in the psychiatrist's brain. That's when my wise, loving, sometimes so candid husband said, "Don't tell me you're gonna do it. Just do it now. Just do it now." Since then, I've made small changes to bring exercise back into my life. I walk the baby and or the dog, check. Get a stepper under my desk, check. Move things around the house, check. For my Spanish, I finally took the plunge and just did it. I buy short stories in Spanish on Kindle. And why this book? Why Kindle? As simple as it's free, it's immediate. So 1 chapter a day, check. Y estoy más feliz que nunca. Let's all spring ourselves out of this perfection trap and remind ourselves that taking action is what's most crucial. That some is better than none. That sometimes good is enough. That good enough is actually great. We need to stop trying to be perfect and realize that it doesn't matter where we start or what we start with. What matters is taking action today. Realize that best is an enemy of great every bit as much as good. Realize that when we're too focused on wanting to be the best, as opposed to what it takes to be better, we become paralyzed. Perhaps there's also a time in your life when you want to change something, but tell yourself, not just yet, because the timing's not optimal, the situation's not perfect. My challenge to you is the next time you want to change something in your life, just do it now. Stop trying to be the best. Instead, try this. Think of one thing that you've always wanted to accomplish. Next, choose one thing that you can do today to get you closer to that goal. Finally, do it. Some is better than none, and the time to do it is now. Thank you.